The silence didn't just fall, it slammed into the private dining room like a concrete slab. 12 armed men abruptly stopped breathing. The clinking of crystal whiskey glasses ceased. All I had done was hand over a financial ledger. But I was running on 3 hours of sleep. My brain had completely short-circuited, and I had just passed a red folder to the most ruthless syndicate leader on the East Coast with the words, "Here are the revised numbers, darling." The air in the private dining room of Laura tasted like dry-aged beef and expensive malice. Claire sat at the very edge of her leather chair, her spine rigidly straight, pretending she belonged in a room where a single wrong word could result in a closed-casket funeral. She was a forensic accountant. 6 months ago, she was tracking embezzled funds for mid-level tech startups. Today, she was the human calculator for Vincent Costa. Vincent sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He didn't fidget. He didn't check his watch. He possessed the terrifying stillness of a man who knew he owned the building, the politicians zoning the building, and the police patrolling the street outside. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Claire's student debt. His dark hair was brushed back, neat, sharply contrasting the casual brutality in his dark, heavy-lidded eyes. Across from him sat Declan Russo. If Vincent was cold steel, Declan was a lit fuse. Russo ran the docks in South Boston, a man who built his empire on extortion and broken kneecaps rather than corporate acquisitions. He chewed on a toothpick, his thick neck spilling over the collar of his shirt. 4 men stood behind Vincent. 4 men stood behind Declan. None of them looked at the food. "You're offering me a 20% stake, Costa," Declan said, his voice a low, gravelly scrape that vibrated against the crystal glassware. "For the Northern Port, 20% is an insult. It's a tip you leave a bad waiter. 20% is precisely what your infrastructure is worth," Vincent replied. His voice was entirely flat. No anger, no negotiation, just a statement of fact. "Your cranes are failing. Your union boss is under federal investigation. You need my capital to keep the port open. I don't need your port to move my freight." Claire stared down at her hands. Her cuticles were picked raw. She was exhausted. A bone-deep, marrow-sucking exhaustion that made her vision swim. She had been awake for 41 hours, scrubbing Declan's cooked books to find the actual miserable value of his shipping operation. Before this dinner, she had endured a screaming 40-minute phone call in the restaurant bathroom with her ex-fiancé David, who couldn't figure out how to separate their shared phone plan. She had spent the entire call mechanically repeating, "Yes, darling, just click the transfer button." "No, darling, I don't have the PIN." The repetition had been a survival tactic, a way to placate a volatile idiot so she could get back to her terrifying job. "I have other buyers," Declan lied. The toothpick snapped in his mouth. "Sell to them, then," Vincent said. He took a slow sip of his water. "But you won't, because they won't cover your existing debts. I will." The tension in the room ratcheted up. The air felt thick, heavy with the unspoken threat of violence. One of Declan's men, a bruiser with a flattened nose, subtly shifted his weight, his hand drifting dangerously close to the lapel of his jacket. In response, Vincent's right-hand man, Leo, let his hand drop to his side. Claire felt a cold drop of sweat slide down her ribs. She hated this. She hated the posturing, the veiled threats, the absolute disregard for human life disguised as business negotiations. But she was trapped. Costa's organization had bought her firm, realized she was a genius with hidden assets, and absorbed her. She wasn't an employee. She was property. "Show him the projections," Vincent said. He didn't look at her. He rarely did. To Vincent Costa, Claire was a tool, a highly efficient flesh-and-blood Excel spreadsheet. Claire blinked, dragging herself out of the fog of fatigue. The quarterly projections? "The debt restructuring," Vincent corrected. a microscopic edge of impatience entering his tone. "Show him what happens to his operation in 6 months if he walks away tonight." Claire fumbled with the clasp of her briefcase. Her fingers felt thick and clumsy. The room was too hot. The overhead pendant light glared directly into her eyes, making her headache pulse in time with her heartbeat. She pulled out the red folder. It contained the exact, brutal reality of Declan's impending bankruptcy. She stood up, intending to slide it down the table. Declan sneered at her. "I don't need a skirt to tell me how my business runs." Vincent's gaze finally snapped to Declan. The temperature in the room plummeted. "She's going to hand you the file, Declan, and you are going to read it." The absolute authority in Vincent's voice rattled around in Claire's sleep-deprived skull. She moved toward Vincent's end of the table to hand him the master copy first, as was protocol. Her feet felt like lead. Her brain was a television stuck on static. David's whining voice from the phone call was still echoing in her ears. "You never listen to me. Just tell me the passcode." She reached Vincent's chair. He held out his hand, palm up, expectant. He didn't look at her. His eyes were locked in a death stare with Declan. Claire placed the red folder into Vincent's large, scarred hand. And then, her exhausted, short-circuiting brain betrayed her. The autopilot kicked in. The placating tone she had used for an hour in the bathroom bypassed her filter completely. "Here are the revised numbers, darling." The word left her mouth. The sound of it seemed to hang in the air, physical and heavy, spinning slowly like a coin tossed over a canyon. "Darling." Claire froze. Her hand was still hovering over the folder. For a fraction of a second, she genuinely didn't comprehend what she had just said. She waited for her brain to catch up, to supply the correct word. "Sir, Mr. Costa, boss." But the room had already reacted. It was immediate and terrifying. The ambient noise of the restaurant outside the private room vanished. The bruiser behind Declan actually stopped chewing his gum. Leo, Vincent's lieutenant, snapped his head toward Claire so fast his neck popped audibly in the quiet. 12 armed men stared at her. In the Mafia, respect is currency. It is armor. To disrespect a boss in front of a rival is not a faux pas. It is a declaration of war, and a mousy accountant calling the head of the Costa Syndicate a pet name reserved for a nagging housewife was an anomaly so bizarre it short-circuited the deeply ingrained protocols of everyone in the room. Declan's eyes widened, darting from Claire to Vincent. A slow, cruel, bewildered smirk began to crawl across his heavy face. Claire's stomach dropped into her shoes. The blood drained from her head so fast she felt physically dizzy. A harsh, metallic taste flooded the back of her throat. Pure, unadulterated panic. "Oh, God!" She slowly lowered her gaze to Vincent. Vincent Costa had not moved. His hand was still resting on the red folder. His shoulders were perfectly relaxed. But his eyes? He slowly turned his head to look up at her. His face was entirely devoid of expression. It was a blank, terrifying canvas. His dark eyes locked onto hers, stripping away every defense she had. He wasn't looking at an accountant anymore. He was looking at a liability, a bug that had just landed on his plate. Claire opened her mouth. A desperate, scrambling apology formed on her tongue. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was on the phone. I'm tired. Please don't kill me." She couldn't speak. Her vocal cords were paralyzed. She was a deer caught not in headlights, but in the crosshairs of a sniper rifle. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. It was long enough for Declan to realize the power dynamic had shifted. Costa, the untouchable, emotionless machine, had a weak spot. A woman who felt comfortable enough to call him a pet name in the middle of a multi-million-dollar sit-down. To Declan, this wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was leverage. It was an exposure of Costa's humanity, a flaw in the armor. "Well," Declan rumbled, the word dripping with ugly amusement. I didn't realize we were in the presence of the Mrs. Costa, you didn't tell me you brought your… what do we call her? Your accountant? Or your bedtime entertainment? A sharp collective intake of breath came from Vincent's men. Leo's hand slipped inside his jacket. Declan's men instantly mirrored the movement. Metal clicked against leather holsters. The rustle of expensive fabric suddenly sounded like a landslide. The standoff went from a simmer to a boil in 1/10 of a second. Guns weren't drawn yet, but they were inches away. Claire shrank back, her knees trembling so violently she thought she might collapse. She had started a gang war, over a misplaced syllable. She was going to die here, on a Tuesday, wearing a sensible Ann Taylor blazer. Declan leaned forward, emboldened by the sudden chaos. Tell me, sweetheart. He sneered at Claire. Does he make you crunch numbers in the bedroom too? Or do you just talk down to him when you're giving him his allowance? The insult was deliberate, a test to see how Costa would react. If Vincent defended her, he looked soft. If he killed her for the disrespect, he looked unstable and out of control. It was a trap, spun entirely out of Claire's exhausted mistake. Claire squeezed her eyes shut. She waited for the gunshot. She waited for Vincent to give the nod to Leo to drag her out by her hair. She deserved it. In this world, you didn't make mistakes. She felt a slight shift in the air. Vincent finally moved. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't signal his men. He simply picked up his crystal glass, the ice clinking softly against the sides, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The mundane sound echoed like a thunderclap. Then he set the glass down. Leo, Vincent said quietly. Yeah, boss. Leo's voice was tight, ready for violence. Vincent kept his eyes on Declan. Take your hand off your gun, all of you. There was a moment of hesitation. Vincent's men were loyal, but their instincts were screaming at them to protect their boss from the blatant disrespect coming from across the table. Slowly, reluctantly, Leo and the others let their hands drop. Declan scoffed, leaning back in his chair. Smart move, Costa. Keep your dogs on a leash. Now, about this 20%. I'm not finished. Vincent interrupted. His voice never raised, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. He slowly turned his chair. He didn't look at Declan. He looked up at Claire. Claire braced herself. This was it. The public execution. The dismissal. Vincent looked at her trembling hands. He looked at the pale, terrified cast of her face, the dark circles under her eyes from the 41 hours she had spent trying to save his money. He saw the sheer, unadulterated terror radiating from her skin. He slowly reached out. Claire flinched. Vincent's large, warm hand wrapped around her wrist. His grip wasn't bruising, but it was absolute. It was an anchor. He gently pulled her closer, forcing her to stand right beside his chair, eliminating the professional distance between them. The room held its collective breath. Vincent looked back across the table at Declan Russo. His face was no longer blank. A cold, predatory smile played at the corner of his mouth. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're going to have to forgive my wife, Declan, Vincent said smoothly. The words hit the room harder than Claire's mistake had. Wife? Claire stopped breathing entirely. Her lungs locked up. Her brain, already struggling, completely flatlined. She stared down at the top of Vincent's head, her wrist still loosely held in his warm, calloused grip. Declan's ugly smirk vanished. He blinked, clearly derailed. Wife? You're not married, Costa. You've never been married. We keep our personal lives private, Vincent said. He casually stroked his thumb across the pulse point of Claire's wrist. His touch was terrifyingly intimate, an anchor in the storm of violence swirling around them. His thumb pressed lightly over her racing pulse, a silent command. Play along or die. She hates it when I work through dinner, especially when I'm forced to sit across from a man who doesn't know how to run his own business. Declan's face flushed a deep, ugly red. You think you can play me, Costa? You bring your accountant in here, she disrespects you to your face, and you cover for her by pretending she's your old lady? You look weak. Do I? Vincent asked. He let go of Claire's wrist and slowly stood up. He was not a massive man like Declan, but when Vincent Costa stood, he occupied every inch of the room. The air pressure seemed to change. The casual, relaxed posture vanished, replaced by a coiled, lethal tension. Let me clarify the situation for you, Declan, Vincent said, his voice dropping an octave. My wife just handed me a folder that details exactly how you've been skimming off your own pension fund to pay off gambling debts in Atlantic City. Declan's color drained instantly. The bluster evaporated. That's bullshit. It's on page 4, Vincent said, gesturing casually to the red folder on the table. She spent the last 2 days tracking your amateur money laundering through 4 different shell companies. She's tired. I'm tired. And frankly, my darling. He deliberately emphasized the word, glancing briefly at Claire with a look that promised a severe reckoning later. Is annoyed that we are wasting our evening on a man who will be bankrupt by Friday. Claire stood rooted to the spot. Her heart was beating so hard she felt it in her teeth. Vincent had taken her catastrophic slip-up and weaponized it. He had woven it into a narrative that not only saved face, but actively humiliated his rival. He hadn't just shielded her. He had used her to assert total dominance. You're out of your mind, Declan stammered, looking back at his men for support. But they looked uneasy. They hadn't known about the Atlantic City debts. The offer is no longer 20%. Vincent said coldly. The offer is 10%. 10%, and I absorb your debts. I take the port, I replace your union boss, and you get to retire to Florida with your kneecaps intact. Declan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Go to hell, Costa. 10%. Vincent repeated. You have 30 seconds to decide before the offer drops to 0, and I just hand this folder over to the feds. The silence returned. But this time, it belonged entirely to Vincent. Declan was a cornered animal, staring at the red folder as if it were a bomb. He looked at Vincent, immovable and cold. Then he looked at Claire. Claire tried to look formidable. She probably looked like a terrified substitute teacher, but standing beside Vincent Costa, draped in his sudden, fabricated protection, she must have looked like a threat. Fine. Declan spat. He didn't look at his men. 10%. Excellent, Vincent said softly. Leo, draw up the paperwork. Declan, get out of my sight. Declan and his men didn't linger. They practically shoved each other out the door, leaving behind the heavy scent of cheap cologne and defeat. As the heavy oak door clicked shut, the tension in the room snapped. Leo let out a long, low whistle. Jesus Christ, boss. Vincent didn't reply. He slowly sat back down in his chair. He looked at the red folder. Then, with agonizing slowness, he turned his head to look up at Claire. The protective facade was gone. The cold, calculating syndicate boss was back. Claire felt her knees finally give out. She grabbed the edge of the mahogany table to keep from collapsing. Claire rasped, her voice cracking. I am so sorry. I don't know why I said it. I was on the phone with David, my ex, right before I walked in, and he wouldn't stop arguing, and my brain just slipped. I swear to God, Mr. Costa, I didn't mean to disrespect you. Vincent stared at her. His dark eyes catalogued every tremor in her hands, every drop of sweat on her pale face. David. Vincent repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Yes, my ex, he's an idiot. And I was tired. I'm so sorry. Vincent leaned back in his chair. He picked up his whiskey glass again. He swirled the amber liquid, watching the ice melt. Sit down, Claire, he commanded quietly. Claire practically fell into the chair next to him. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, waiting for the punishment. You didn't embarrass a boss and walk away. Even if he used it to win a negotiation, she had shown a crack in his armor to his men. Leo, Vincent said, not taking his eyes off his glass. Yeah, boss. Find out who David is. Find out where he works, where he banks, and who holds his mortgage. Claire gasped. No, please, Mr. Costa, he's just an annoying guy. You don't have to hurt him. Vincent finally looked at her. His expression was unreadable, but a dark intensity burned behind his eyes. I'm not going to hurt him, Claire, Vincent said smoothly, though the promise of violence lingered beneath the words. But if I'm going to have a wife, I can't have some idiot ex-boyfriend harassing her before my business meetings. It's bad for my bottom line. Claire stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Wife. That was just for Declan, to save the negotiation. Vincent set his glass down. He leaned toward her, the faint scent of sandalwood and danger washing over her. He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was gentle, but it felt like a brand. Declan is a loudmouth, Vincent said softly. His voice meant only for her. By tomorrow morning, half the city will know that Vincent Costa has a wife. The other half will know she's a forensic accountant who just bankrupted the South Boston port. Claire felt the blood drain from her face all over again. They'll come after me. They will try. Vincent corrected. Which means, for your own safety, and for the integrity of my reputation. He leaned back, a dark, possessive smirk finally breaking through his stoic mask. You're going to have to move in with me, darling. The hostile takeover of Claire's life took exactly 47 minutes. That was how long it took Leo and 3 enormous men in tailored suits to pack up her entire existence. Claire stood in the center of her cramped, third-floor walk-up in Somerville, holding a half-empty mug of cold coffee, entirely useless. Leave the IKEA furniture, Leo ordered, tossing a stack of Claire's tax law textbooks into a heavy-duty plastic tote. The boss already furnished your rooms. Just take clothes, personal documents, and whatever sentimental junk you can't live without. Claire watched a man whose rap sheet probably included extortion carefully wrap her grandmother's ceramic teapot in bubble wrap. It was a deeply surreal violation of privacy. I have a lease, Leo, she said. Her voice sounded thin, hollowed out by the sheer adrenaline crash following the restaurant showdown. I can't just abandon my apartment. Leo didn't look up. He taped the tote shut with a sharp, violent ripping sound. Your landlord received a cashier's check for the remainder of your lease, plus a 20% inconvenience fee. You don't live here anymore, Miss Claire. She was an asset being relocated to a secure facility. The realization settled in her stomach like a lead weight. Vincent Costa hadn't asked her to move in. He had dictated it as a logistical necessity. She was now a piece on his board, positioned to block Declan Russo's retaliatory strikes. When they escorted her down to the street, a black, armored SUV was idling at the curb. The sheer weight of the vehicle pressed the tires flat against the asphalt. Claire climbed into the back, the heavy door thudding shut behind her, sealing her in a soundproof, bulletproof vacuum. Vincent's estate was in Weston, hidden behind 10-foot stone walls and a wrought-iron gate that slid open with a heavy, industrial groan. The house itself wasn't the gaudy faux roman villa Claire expected of a crime syndicate boss. It was a sprawling, brutalist structure of concrete, steel, and massive panes of reinforced glass. It looked less like a home and more like a high-end rehabilitation clinic for dangerous people. Leo led her inside. The foyer smelled of ozone, floor wax, and absolute silence. The east wing is yours. Vincent's voice echoed off the polished concrete floors. Claire jumped. Vincent was standing at the top of a floating steel staircase, looking down at her. He wore a simple black sweater and dark trousers, stripping away the corporate armor of his suit, but the casual clothing only emphasized the broad, muscular build beneath. He walked down the stairs slowly. "You have a bedroom, a private bathroom, and an office set up for your firm's servers," Vincent said, stopping a few feet away from her. His dark eyes scanned her face, registering the exhaustion clinging to her. "You will not leave the grounds without an escort. You will not order food delivery. If you need something, give a list to Rosa in the kitchen." Claire clutched her purse to her chest. It was a pathetic, civilian shield against a man who ordered hits with his morning espresso. "And how long am I supposed to be a prisoner here?" "You aren't a prisoner," Vincent replied smoothly. "Prisoners don't get a salary bump. I tripled your retainer. I don't want your money. You want my protection." He countered, stepping closer. The air between them instantly grew dense. "Russo is bleeding cash, which makes him desperate. Desperate men do not care that you are just an accountant. They only care that I put my hand on your wrist in front of 12 men and claimed you. Out there, you are a target. In here, you are untouchable." Claire swallowed hard. The logic was airtight. It was infuriating. "And what are the rules of this arrangement?" "Simple," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a low, quiet register. "In this house, we are employer and employee. You do my books, you find my leaks, you keep my money clean. But when we step outside these gates—" He reached out. Claire flinched, but she didn't step back. Vincent's knuckles brushed lightly against her cheekbone, a touch so fleeting it barely registered. Yet it sent a sharp jolt of electricity straight down her spine. "When we step outside, Claire," he finished, holding her gaze with terrifying intensity. "You are my wife, and you will act like a woman who belongs at my side. Do we have a deal?" Claire looked at the man who owned her life. She nodded once. "Good," Vincent said, dropping his hand. The warmth vanished. "Leo will show you to your room. Dinner is at 8. Don't be late." Living with Vincent Costa was an exercise in extreme cognitive dissonance. By day, Claire sat in her newly assigned state-of-the-art office, surrounded by multiple monitors. She tracked millions of dollars moving through dummy corporations, construction front companies, and offshore accounts. Vincent's empire was staggering, a labyrinth of legitimate and illicit funds woven together with terrifying precision. By night, she sat at the opposite end of a massive oak dining table, eating perfectly seared halibut in absolute, crushing silence. Vincent read dossiers. Claire stared at her plate. The staff moved around them like ghosts. It was day 4 of her captivity when the David problem was resolved. Claire was in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, brewing coffee. She was wearing oversized sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt, enjoying the rare 5 minutes of the day when the house felt empty. Vincent walked in. He was already dressed for the day in a crisp white shirt, the cuffs rolled up to reveal a faded, jagged scar running up his left forearm. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the marble island, slid a thick manila envelope across the counter toward her, and turned to pour himself a coffee. Claire eyed the envelope suspiciously. "Is this the quarterly report for the sanitation union?" "No," Vincent said, taking a sip from his mug. "It's David." Claire froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She stared at the envelope as if it were leaking blood. "What did you do? Open it." With shaking hands, Claire pulled the tab. Papers slid out. No photos of a beaten man, no ransom notes, just thick legal documents heavily stamped by a notary. She blinked, trying to make sense of the legalese. "This is a deed transfer, for a condo in Seattle. Turn the page," Vincent instructed mildly. She flipped the heavy stock paper. "A job offer? From a tech firm in Washington State? For David?" She looked up, completely baffled. "I don't understand." Vincent leaned against the counter, crossing his ankles. Your ex-fiancé was a nuisance. He called your phone excessively. He distracted my chief accountant. In my world, nuisances are eliminated. Claire felt a cold sweat break out on her neck. You killed him? Vincent let out a short, rough laugh. It was a surprisingly human sound. I am a businessman, Claire, not a psychopath. Killing a civilian draws federal heat. It's sloppy. He tapped the documents. I bought his mortgage. I had my holding company terminate his current employment contract through a structural buyout. Then, I had a subsidiary in Seattle offer him a position with a 40% pay increase and full relocation benefits. Claire stared at him, her mouth hanging open. You bought his life. I incentivized his departure. Vincent corrected smoothly. He signed the papers yesterday. He flies out tomorrow morning. He will never call you again, because if he does, the Seattle firm will terminate him with cause, and he will lose the condo. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. There was no violence. There were no broken bones. Vincent Costa had simply wielded his wealth and influence like a scalpel, surgically excising David from the East Coast without David ever realizing he had been manipulated by the Mafia. You ruined his life by giving him a promotion. Claire whispered, the sheer absurdity of it washing over her. He's happy. You have quiet. I have a focused accountant. Vincent set his mug down. Everyone wins. Claire looked down at the papers. She had spent months agonizing over David, crying over the breakup, dealing with his petty, weaponized incompetence regarding their shared bills. And Vincent had solved it in 3 days with a few phone calls. It was deeply disturbing. And God help her, it was incredibly hot. She looked up at Vincent. He was watching her closely, tracking the subtle shifts in her expression. He was waiting for her to call him a monster. Thank you, Claire said softly. Vincent's eyes widened, just a fraction. It was the first time she had ever surprised him. The cold, impenetrable mask slipped for a microsecond, revealing something dark and intensely curious underneath. He pushed off the counter, closing the distance between them. He stopped just inches away. The scent of his expensive cologne and black coffee wrapped around her. Don't thank me yet, Claire, he murmured, his voice a low rumble in his chest. You're going to earn it tonight. Tonight? Carmine Moretti is hosting a charity gala for the Children's Hospital. The entire Northeastern Syndicate will be there, including Declan Russo. Vincent reached out, his fingers brushing the fabric of her faded t-shirt. Tonight, you stop being my accountant. Tonight, you belong to me. The dress was a weapon. It was a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk that cost more than Claire's car. It clung to every curve of her body with liquid precision, leaving her shoulders bare and plunging deeply down her back. A team of stylists provided by Vincent had spent 3 hours wrestling her messy hair into an elegant, sweeping updo and painting her face until she barely recognized her own reflection. She looked dangerous. She looked expensive. Claire stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, her stomach twisting into violent knots. She was a fraud wrapped in haute couture. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Come in, she called out, her voice trembling. Vincent opened the door. He was wearing a custom-tailored black tuxedo. The harsh, uncompromising lines of the suit made him look taller, broader, and infinitely more lethal. He stepped into the room, and the air immediately felt thinner. He stopped a few feet away, his dark eyes sweeping slowly over her. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Claire felt a blush creep up her neck. Is it too much? She asked nervously, smoothing her hands over the silk at her hips. I feel like an imposter. You look exactly like what you are, Vincent said quietly. A terrified accountant? Mine. The word wasn't spoken with affection. It was a statement of territorial fact. Vincent stepped closer, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a flat, black velvet box and snapped it open. Inside lay a diamond necklace. The stones were enormous, catching the warm light of the room and throwing shards of rainbow color against the walls. "Turn around," he ordered softly. Claire obeyed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt his presence behind her, a solid wall of heat. His rough fingertips brushed the sensitive skin of her nape as he clasped the cold platinum chain around her neck. A shiver violently racked her body. "Listen to me," Vincent murmured, his mouth hovering just inches from her ear. "When we walk into that ballroom, they are going to look at you. They are going to judge you, dissect you, and look for weakness. Do not give them any." "I don't know how to act," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Vincent rested his hands lightly on her bare shoulders. His thumbs stroked the tension in her collarbone. "You act bored. You act as though their presence is an inconvenience to you. You do not speak unless spoken to, and when you do, you speak softly. If you feel panicked, you look at me. Understood?" "Understood." "Good." He turned her around to face him. He offered his arm. "Let's go show the wolves what they can't have." The ballroom of the Grand Hotel was a sea of false smiles and hidden firearms. A string quartet played Vivaldi over the low hum of conversation. The room was packed with politicians, judges, and the most dangerous criminals on the eastern seaboard, all drinking champagne out of identical crystal flutes. The moment Vincent and Claire walked through the gilded double doors, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sudden silence, but a physical rippling of attention. Heads turned. Eyes darted. Whispers ignited like dry brush catching fire. Claire felt a wave of absolute terror wash over her. She gripped Vincent's bicep. The muscle beneath the tuxedo jacket was like iron. Vincent didn't miss a beat. He placed his hand over hers, his fingers lacing through hers. It was a deeply intimate gesture, designed for an audience. "Breathe, darling," Vincent said softly, a cruel, mocking echo of her own mistake. They'd moved through the crowd. Men in expensive suits stepped aside, parting like the Red Sea. Vincent offered nods, sharp and curt. He didn't introduce her. He didn't need to. The diamond necklace and his hand holding hers spoke volumes. "Costa." The voice was raspy, thick with cigar smoke and age. Vincent stopped. Claire felt his entire body tense, though his face remained perfectly passive. Standing in their path was Carmine Moretti. He was an older man, heavily wrinkled, leaning on a silver-topped cane. But his eyes were sharp, bright, and utterly merciless. Carmine was the old guard, a man who commanded respect through decades of bloodshed. "Carmine," Vincent greeted respectfully. "A successful turnout. The hospital will be pleased," Carmine replied, not looking at Vincent. His sharp eyes were locked entirely on Claire. He looked her up and down, a slow, invasive appraisal. "And who is this?" "Declan Russo has been spinning wild tales about a wife. I told him he was drinking too much. Costa doesn't share his life." "Declan talks too much," Vincent said smoothly. He pulled Claire slightly closer to his side. "Carmine, my wife, Claire." Carmine leaned forward on his cane. He didn't offer his hand. "Wife, quiet ceremony?" "Private," Vincent corrected. Carmine hummed, a dry, rattling sound in his throat. He looked at Claire. "You're a brave woman, Claire. Or a foolish one. Men in our line of work. We don't have long lifespans. We leave behind rich widows." The threat was thinly veiled. It was a test to see if she would crack. Claire felt Vincent's thumb press hard into the back of her hand. "Act bored. Act untouched." She took a slow breath, forcing her heart rate down. She channeled every ounce of annoyance she had ever felt toward difficult clients, arrogant auditors, and ex-boyfriends who couldn't pay their own bills. She looked Carmine Moretti dead in the eye. "I'm an accountant, Mr. Moretti," Claire said, her voice cool, steady, and utterly flat. "I specialize in risk assessment and asset management. I assure you my husband is a very sound investment, and I don't let my investments fail." For a full 3 seconds, the space between them was dead silent. Vincent didn't move. Then Carmine Moretti threw his head back and let out a loud, barking laugh. "An accountant?" Carmine wheezed, tapping his cane on the marble floor. "Christ, Costa, you married a goddamn auditor. No wonder you keep your books so tight." He looked back at Claire, a glint of genuine amusement in his eyes. "Good luck to you, sweetheart. You'll need it." Carmine turned and limped away into the crowd. Claire let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 10 minutes. Her knees were shaking so badly she thought she might collapse. Vincent turned to her. The mask was gone. He looked down at her with an expression she had never seen before. It was a mixture of shock, profound respect, and something entirely predatory. "An investment?" Vincent murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips. Claire swallowed hard. It was the first thing that came to mind. It was perfect. Vincent didn't wait for a response. He slipped his hand to the small of her back, his fingers pressing against her bare skin, and guided her toward a secluded balcony overlooking the city skyline. The air outside was cool, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the ballroom. He closed the glass doors behind them, shutting out the noise, the string quartet, and the prying eyes of the syndicate. They were alone in the dark. Vincent backed her slowly against the stone balustrade. He placed a hand on either side of her waist, trapping her. He leaned in close, his gaze heavy and hot. "You play the part a little too well, Claire," Vincent whispered, his breath ghosting over her cheek. "I'm starting to think you're not faking it." The air on the balcony was a sharp, frigid shock after the suffocating warmth of the ballroom. Below them, the city sprawling out was a grid of amber streetlights and crawling headlights. But Claire couldn't focus on the view. Her entire universe had narrowed down to the heavy, solid weight of Vincent Costa, pressing her against the cold stone of the balustrade. "I'm not faking anything," Claire breathed, the lie tasting like cheap wine on her tongue. "I'm surviving." Vincent studied her. The ambient light from the city below caught the sharp angles of his jaw and the dangerous, quiet intelligence in his eyes. He didn't look like a man playing a game. He looked like a man who had just found something he didn't know he was looking for. "Survival is a base instinct, Claire," he murmured, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin just below her jawline. The diamond necklace felt heavy against her collarbone, a glittering shackle tying her to this violent world. "What you did in there with Carmine, that wasn't just survival, that was strategy. You looked the devil in the eye and calculated his exact net worth." "I told you, I'm an accountant." "You're a liar," Vincent corrected softly, a faint, dark smile touching his lips. "You're a natural." He leaned in closer. The scent of him, sandalwood, expensive wool, and a faint metallic tang of adrenaline enveloped her completely. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She knew she should push him away. This was a business arrangement, a hostage situation painted in haute couture, but her hands, resting flat against the crisp fabric of his tuxedo shirt, didn't push. They curled, her fingers digging into the muscle of his chest. Vincent's gaze dropped to her mouth. The air between them grew impossibly heavy, charged with a magnetic, terrifying pull. Then the world exploded. It didn't happen with a cinematic slow-motion grace. It was violent, abrupt, and deafening. The thick glass of the balcony doors behind them shattered inward, raining a million glittering shards across the stone floor. A sharp, cracking sound, distinct from the shattering glass, whipped past Claire's ear, carrying the displaced air of a bullet breaking the sound barrier. Vincent's reaction was instantaneous and brutal. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look back to assess the threat. He simply grabbed the back of Claire's neck and threw his entire weight against her, driving them both hard to the stone deck. Claire hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud. The breath was knocked from her lungs in a violent rush. Before she could even process the pain, Vincent was completely covering her, pressing her face into the cold stone, shielding her body with his own. More gunshots rang out. The sharp, rapid pop, pop, pop of a suppressed automatic weapon chewing through the stone balustrade above them. Chunks of masonry rained down, dusting Vincent's black tuxedo jacket in white powder. "Stay down!" Vincent roared, the sound vibrating through his chest and into hers. Claire couldn't scream. Her vocal cords were paralyzed. The raw, unfiltered reality of Vincent's world had finally crashed through the pristine, controlled facade. People were actively trying to kill them. Inside the ballroom, the string quartet had abruptly stopped. Screams erupted. The heavy thud of overturned tables and the frantic scuffling of expensive leather shoes against marble echoed out onto the balcony. Vincent reached into his tuxedo jacket. When his hand emerged, it was holding a compact, matte black handgun. He didn't blindly return fire over the ledge. He stayed perfectly flat, his body a heavy, unyielding shield over Claire, his eyes scanning the darkness across the street. "Leo!" Vincent bellowed over the chaos. A shadow burst through the shattered balcony doors. Leo hit the deck, sliding on the broken glass, his own weapon drawn. Blood was dripping from a shallow cut on his forehead, but his face was a mask of pure, violent focus. "Sniper, boss!" Leo shouted over the din. "Rooftop across the avenue. We got runners in the stairwell. Russo's guys." "Declan is dead," Vincent said. The absolute, cold certainty in his voice was more terrifying than the gunfire. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. A line item on a ledger that had just been balanced. "Get the car to the loading dock." "Already moving, boss." Vincent looked down at Claire. His face was inches from hers. The cold, impenetrable syndicate leader was gone. In his place was a man vibrating with lethal energy. "Claire!" he said sharply, demanding her attention. Her eyes, wide and terrified, snapped to his. "Are you hit?" I don't think so." Her voice was a pathetic squeak. "I'm going to stand up. When I do, you are going to grab the back of my belt and you are not going to let go. You are going to look at my back and nothing else. Do you understand?" She nodded frantically. "Move!" Vincent barked. He vaulted to his feet, grabbing her arm and hauling her up in one fluid motion. Claire gripped his belt, her manicured nails digging into the leather. They sprinted back through the shattered doors into the ballroom. It was a war zone. Tables were flipped, serving as barricades. The elite criminals of the eastern seaboard were huddled behind them, weapons drawn. Carmine Moretti was surrounded by a wall of bodyguards, calmly lighting a cigar while hell broke loose around him. Vincent didn't stop. He dragged Claire through the chaos, moving with a terrifying, predatory grace. They hit the service doors, plunging into a dimly lit concrete hallway. Leo took the point, checking corners with brutal efficiency. They reached the loading dock just as the black, armored SUV screeched to a halt, the heavy doors already swinging open. Vincent shoved Claire into the back seat, diving in right behind her. "Drive!" Leo yelled from the passenger seat. The SUV tore out of the alley, the massive engine roaring as it hit the street, instantly blending into the frantic gridlock of city traffic. Inside the cabin, the silence was deafening, broken only by the harsh, ragged sound of Claire's breathing. She was shaking violently, her teeth chattering. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in fine white dust from the masonry. There was a small tear in the silk of her dress. She looked up at Vincent. He was calmly ejecting the magazine from his handgun, checking the rounds, and slamming it back into the grip. His hands were perfectly steady. He broke the rules? Claire whispered, her voice trembling. Declan, he shot at us at a charity event. Vincent slid the gun back into his holster. He looked at her, his eyes dark and empty. Declan didn't shoot at us to send a message. He shot at us because he's broke, he's terrified, and he knows that by Monday morning I will own everything he has. Vincent reached across the seat. He didn't pull her into a comforting embrace. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He reached out and wiped a smudge of concrete dust from her cheekbone with his thumb. This is the reality, Claire. Vincent said quietly. This is what happens when you balance my books. Still want to be an investment? Claire stared at him. The sheer adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. She thought about her old life, the mundane, soul-crushing boredom of corporate audits, the petty arguments with David over phone bills. Then she thought about the way Vincent had thrown himself over her without a second thought. I want his ledgers, Claire said, her voice dropping the tremor. Vincent paused, his thumb halting on her cheek. What? Declan Rousseau's ledgers, Claire repeated, the cold logic of her profession snapping into place, acting as an anchor in the madness. The red folder was just the surface level. The shell companies. The pension skimming. If he's desperate enough to order a hit in a ballroom full of syndicate bosses, he's hiding something worse. Something that will ruin him not just financially, but with Carmine. A slow, terrifying smile spread across Vincent's face. It was the smile of a wolf watching a lamb grow fangs. Get her the books, Leo, Vincent ordered, never taking his eyes off Claire. The compound was on full lockdown. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter with restless, violent energy. Inside, the massive, brutalist house felt like a submarine deep underwater, insulated from the pressure but acutely aware of the crushing depth. Claire had stripped off the ruined silk dress. She was back in oversized sweatpants and a thick sweater, her hair tied in a messy, chaotic knot. She sat in the center of her state-of-the-art office, surrounded by 5 glowing monitors. It was 3:14 a.m. The desk was covered in printed spreadsheets, banking records, and complex flowcharts she had drawn in red marker. She was systematically tearing Declan Rousseau's life apart, transaction by transaction. Vincent stood in the doorway, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. He had shed the tuxedo jacket and tie, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He had been standing there for 20 minutes, just watching her work. He had expected her to break. When the bullets started flying, civilians broke. They cried, they panicked, they demanded to go home. Claire had demanded tax documents. She was a machine, fueled by black coffee and sheer, spiteful focus. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her eyes tracking columns of numbers with a predator's intensity. She wasn't just hiding behind him anymore. She had climbed into the trenches with him, armed with a spreadsheet. You're tracking a ghost, Vincent said finally, stepping into the room. We already squeezed his known accounts. The unions, the port authorities. It's all hollow. Claire didn't look up from the monitor. People don't hide their real money in accounts attached to their names, Vincent, and they don't hide it in shell companies they control directly. They hide it in their debts. Vincent walked up behind her chair, leaning over to look at the screen. The proximity sent a small jolt through Claire, but she didn't flinch away. She pointed a pen at a series of transactions. Look at this, she said, her voice raspy. For the last 4 years, Declan has been paying an exorbitant consulting fee to a firm in the Cayman Islands, Aegis Logistics. Logistics consulting is standard for port operations. Not at these margins, Claire countered, her finger tapping the screen sharply. He's overpaying them by roughly 300% above market rate. But here's the catch. I tracked the routing numbers for Aegis. They don't have offices. They don't have employees. The money goes into the Cayman account, sits for 30 days, and is then transferred to a private trust fund registered in Geneva. Vincent narrowed his eyes, the whiskey glass pausing halfway to his mouth. Who is the beneficiary of the trust? Claire finally turned her head, looking up at him. She was exhausted, the dark circles under her eyes bruised and heavy, but a fierce, triumphant light burned in her pupils. It's not Declan, Claire said. It's a woman named Maria Moretti, Carmine's estranged daughter. The silence in the room became absolute. The hum of the computer servers seemed to amplify. Vincent set his glass down on the desk with a sharp clack. Are you certain? I cross-referenced the Geneva Trust's formation dates with Maria Moretti's relocation to Europe 6 years ago. The timeline matches perfectly. The signature on the trust documents, buried in a subsidiary filing, belongs to Declan Rousseau. Claire leaned back in her chair, wiping a hand over her tired face. Declan isn't just skimming from his own pension funds. He's been embezzling from Carmine Moretti's personal family wealth, using his daughter as a blind drop to launder the money. If Carmine finds out Declan is using his blood to wash stolen cash, Carmine will skin him alive. Vincent finished, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He stared at the monitor, processing the sheer magnitude of the leverage Claire had just handed him. This wasn't just a business advantage. This was an execution order. Rousseau had signed his own death warrant. He just didn't know it yet. Vincent slowly turned his gaze from the screen to the woman sitting in his chair. She was a forensic accountant, a number cruncher, a civilian who, less than a week ago, was crying in a bathroom over a shared phone plan. And in 3 hours, armed with nothing but a keyboard, she had dismantled an empire that Vincent had been fighting for 5 years. He reached down and grasped the armrests of her chair, boxing her in. He leaned down until they were eye to eye. The raw, unfiltered intensity in his stare pinned her to the seat. You are terrifying, Vincent whispered. Claire swallowed hard, her heart kicking into a familiar, frantic rhythm. I told you, I don't let my investments fail. Vincent didn't smile. He brought one hand up, brushing the stray, messy hairs away from her face. His thumb dragged across her cheekbone, lingering on the spot where he had wiped away the concrete dust hours ago. The touch was slow, deliberate, and entirely possessive. The marriage was a lie, Vincent said, his voice dropping to a gravelly register that made the hair on her arms stand up. A convenient fiction to keep Rousseau off balance. I know, Claire breathed, but I don't share. Vincent continued, moving closer until his mouth was a breath away from hers. I don't share my territory, I don't share my money, and I do not share what belongs to me. He closed the distance. The kiss was not gentle. It was not a tentative exploration. It was a hostile takeover. Vincent claimed her mouth with the same ruthless authority he used to run his syndicate. It was demanding, consuming, and laced with the adrenaline of surviving the night. Claire didn't freeze. She didn't push him away. The tension that had been winding tighter and tighter within her, since the moment she called him darling, finally snapped. She reached up, burying her hands in his thick, dark hair, pulling him closer, kissing him back with a desperate, answering heat. He hauled her out of the chair, his arms wrapping tightly around her waist, lifting her until her toes barely touched the floor. He backed her into the edge of the heavy desk, papers scattering, the red ledger charts fluttering to the floor like autumn leaves. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both breathing heavily. Vincent rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. When this is over, Vincent said, his voice rough. When Declan is a memory and the dust settles, you are not going back to Somerville, Claire. You are not going back to corporate audits. Claire opened her eyes, looking at the lethal, beautiful man holding her. She had stepped off a cliff the moment she handed him that red folder. There was no going back to the safety of the ground. I know, she said quietly. The commission didn't meet in dark, smoky back rooms anymore. They met in a glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of a high-rise in the financial district. It looked exactly like a legitimate corporate merger. There were carafes of iced water, leather chairs, legal pads. But the men sitting around the mahogany table controlled a shadow economy worth billions. Carmine Moretti sat at the head of the table, his silver-topped cane resting against his chair. Declan Russo sat on the left, sweating profusely, looking cornered and furious. The heavy glass doors opened. Vincent Costa walked in. He didn't bring Leo. He didn't bring Muscle. He brought his accountant. Claire walked perfectly in step beside Vincent. She wore a tailored slate-grey suit that screamed quiet, uncompromising power. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless bun. She carried a single, thick, black leather briefcase. She wasn't terrified anymore. The trembling had stopped. She knew the numbers, and numbers, unlike men, did not lie. "Costa!" Carmine greeted, his voice dry. He eyed Claire with a mixture of amusement and sharp calculation. "You bring the wife to a sit-down. This is commission business, not a charity gala. My wife manages my portfolio, Carmine," Vincent said smoothly, pulling out a chair for Claire before sitting down beside her. "And since we are discussing the acquisition of Russo's assets, her presence is required." Declan slammed his heavy fist onto the table. "Acquisition? You arrogant prick! You staged a hit on yourself at the gala to drum up sympathy. I didn't order those shooters." "No one cares about the shooters, Declan," Vincent said softly. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of absolute, terrifying relaxation. "We are businessmen. We care about the bottom line." Claire didn't hesitate. She placed the black briefcase on the table, snapped the latches open, and pulled out a stack of neatly bound files. She slid one across the polished wood to Carmine, and one to Declan. Declan stared at it like it was a live grenade. "What is this?" Carmine asked, flipping open the cover. "A complete forensic audit of Declan Russo's port operations over the last 48 months. Claire said. Her voice was clear, crisp, and devoid of any emotion. The perfect corporate executioner. "As you will see on page 12, the operation has been functionally insolvent for 2 years. He has been masking the deficit by taking out exorbitant loans against syndicate property without commission approval." Declan's face went chalk white. "She's lying. She cooked the books to frame me." "I don't cook books, Mr. Russo," Claire replied coldly. "I read them, but the insolvency isn't the primary issue." She turned her gaze directly to Carmine Moretti. The old boss had stopped reading. He was looking at Claire, his eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "Turn to page 24, Mr. Moretti," Claire instructed quietly. Carmine flipped the pages. His eyes scanned the highlighted transactions. The room fell into a deathly, suffocating silence. Claire didn't gloat. She just delivered the math. "Mr. Russo has been laundering syndicate money through a shell company called Aegis Logistics. He has been deliberately routing the embezzled funds into a private trust in Geneva. A trust belonging to your daughter, Maria." Carmine's breathing stopped. The old man froze, staring at the paper. "He wasn't just stealing from you, Carmine," Vincent added, his voice dropping into the silent room like an anvil. "He was setting your daughter up to take the fall for federal racketeering charges if the FBI ever cracked his books." Declan leaped out of his chair, panic completely erasing his bluster. "Carmine, I swear to God, I didn't. It's a setup. Costa planted those roots." Carmine didn't look at Declan. He slowly closed the file. He placed his hands flat on the mahogany table. When he looked up, his eyes were completely dead. The amusement was gone. The old guard boss was back. "Declan," Carmine said softly. The quietness of his voice was infinitely more terrifying than a shout. "Sit down. Carmine, please, sit down." Declan collapsed back into his chair, looking like a man who had just been handed his own autopsy report. Carmine turned to Vincent. "The port is yours, Costa. At a 0% valuation. You take his debts. You take his infrastructure." "Agreed," Vincent said. Carmine finally looked at Claire. The old man's expression softened just a fraction, revealing a terrifying, profound respect. "You found this in 2 days." "It was buried deep," Claire said simply. "But money always leaves a trail." Carmine nodded slowly. He picked up his cane and stood up. The meeting was over. "Costa, keep this one. She's worth more than the port." Carmine walked out of the room, followed by his bodyguards. He didn't say another word to Declan. He didn't need to. Declan Russo was a dead man walking. The moment he left this building, Carmine's men would ensure he disappeared. Declan sat at the table, staring blankly at the wall. He was ruined. Vincent stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked down at Declan, no pity in his eyes. Then he held out his hand to Claire. She took it. They walked out of the boardroom together, leaving the wreckage of a rival empire behind them. As the elevator doors slid closed, sealing them in the quiet, mirrored cab, Claire finally let out a long breath. The tension bled out of her shoulders. Vincent reached over and hit the emergency stop button. The elevator jerked to a halt. He turned to her, pinning her against the wall of the elevator. He didn't say a word. He just buried his face in her neck, inhaling deeply, before capturing her lips in a slow, deep, agonizingly thorough kiss. "Darling," Vincent murmured against her mouth, a wicked, genuine smile finally breaking across his face. Claire wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. She had balanced the ledger, eliminated the deficit, and secured the ultimate asset. "Take me home, Vincent," she said. And for the first time in his life, the boss of the Costa Syndicate followed orders. And that brings us to the end of Claire and Vincent's story, from a sleep-deprived slip of the tongue to completely dismantling a mafia empire with nothing but a spreadsheet. Claire proved that intelligence is the deadliest weapon in the room. If you enjoyed this high-stakes, slow-burn mafia romance, do not forget to hit that like button. It helps the channel out tremendously. Share this video with your friends who love a good, fake marriage turns deadly real trope, and subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss a new story. Drop a comment below. Would you have the guts to hand Carmine Moretti that red folder? See you in the next video.